small till it ain't, till it ain't, till it ain't, till it ain't. I'm building up a wall till it breaks. She hated when I call and it's late. I don't wanna keep you waiting. I hope I never keep you waiting. She think I know it all, but I don't.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Mixtape with Scott. I am the host, Scott Cunningham. I am a professor of economics at Baylor University in Waco, Texas. And this is a podcast about the personal stories of living economists. And more recently, I don't know if it's because I'm teaching this economics of artificial intelligence class. I don't know if it's because of that history of economic thought class I teach in the fall. I don't know if it's because of all the causal inference and my fascination with the people that have been sort of key contributors to that material. I don't know what it is, but I have been very interested in economic historians. I've noticed for several years. I don't have any work in that area, but I'm just a big. I'm very intrigued by the group of economists. One of my closest friends, and a couple of my closest friends are economic historians and whatever. And I've known about our guest for a long time, the guest this week. I've known about him for a long time. His name's Nathan Nunn. He's very well known at the University of British Columbia. And he's a professor at University of British Columbia, Vancouver School of Economics, and he's also the Canada Research Chair. He spent really his entire career at Harvard, most of it, as an assistant professor, and then associate full, and then he went up to from 2016 to 2022 as the Frederick Abb Professor of Economics. And I was really surprised when I learned that he went back to Canada. And so he is a really well-known economic historian that works in areas of development, trade, and African development and the slave trade in particular, or at least that's the work that I know him for. So I reached out to him and asked if I could have him on the show because I really have been wanting to talk to more economic historians. And he was gracious enough to agree. And so that's what this episode is about. And we're going to turn it over to those guys right now. But I just wanted to say thank you for supporting the podcast. Thank you for supporting me. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing it. I hope that you like this. I think that Nathan is such an interesting economist. He works on so many. He's a great example of the kind of economist most people outside of economics don't know about. I think a lot of people still really do not understand what economics is. And I think it's probably true if all of us could kind of reflect on how we got into economics. It's kind of weird. We probably did not, as a kid, want to become an economist. Probably didn't even know what probably did not have a clue what economics was, let alone what an economist did. And so I really think that Nathan is one of these people because of his work in history and the African slave trade and then culture in generally. I think it's the kind of thing like young people or others can go, wow, I didn't really know this was a field. And I didn't know really people could do this. And so anyway, but I think all of our stories are probably stories like that we could, if we had a chance to share it with young people or others, that they'd probably feel that way too. Anyway, thank you so much for tuning in, and I'm going to turn it over to those guys now. Well, it's a real pleasure to have on the show. I've actually never had the pleasure of talking with you very much. We've chatted, I believe, on Twitter like a million years ago, but this is my first time to meet you, Dr. Nathan Nunn. Thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks so much. It's a real pleasure to be here. And so thanks for inviting me.
Well, before so for the sake of the listener, can you tell us the long title of your job and who pays your paycheck?
Okay. the long title. The short title is I'm a professor of economics. I guess the longer title is I'm a Canada Research Chair in Cultural Economics at the University of British Columbia, specifically the Vancouver School of Economics within the University of British Columbia. And it's UBC that pays my salary.
Hey, sorry. Oh, I didn't realize there was these whole city school of economics, like Barcelona,
Yeah.
Paris. I didn't realize there was a Vancouver one.
Yeah, there's a Vancouver one. And it just means, I don't know the exact details, but it's a little bit, there's a little more autonomy than for a department. Yeah.
Oh,
And so, yeah.
okay.
So it became a school, I don't know, was it maybe 10 years ago or something like that? Yeah.
Oh, that's
So,
cool.
yeah.
Okay. Well, before we get started, I was going to start with an icebreaker. What's a vacation that you've gone on? It doesn't have to be a recent one, and
Mhm.
it doesn't have to be an old one. It doesn't have to be the best one or the worst one, but it's just something that you've noticed you still think about every now and then.
A vacation? Wow, yeah, that's a good question. So I guess there's two. One is a trip to Cuba in 2003, which was very interesting. Saw a lot of the island. So that would be one. Another one would be the first time I went to the Democratic Republic of Congo with James Robinson, Sarah Lowe's, and John Weigel, and we visited the Cuba Kingdom. So that was another memorable one, and that was
Oh,
2013. So.
oh wow. Oh,
Yeah.
those both sound amazing. Back in
Yeah.
2003 in Cuba, what was it like?
It was good. Yeah, yeah. It was really got to see a bunch of the island. I remember I rented a moped and
Yeah,
just like started heading, we were kind of around Havana, started heading down the island as far as I could go.
yeah.
And then, yeah, went to some rural towns, met some people. And so, yeah, so kind of saw
Had
saw a
you
little
always
bit of the
wanted to go
culture.
there?
What's
Had you
that?
had you always wanted to go there?
A little bit. It was a family trip, more or less. Like, so we're living in Canada, so at the time, it's not a big deal to go to Cuba. Like, if you're Canadian
Oh, right. Yeah.
versus the U.S. And then it is true. Like at the time, they would not stamp your passport because then if you went to the U.S., the U.S. customs would see that. But they would stamp a piece of paper that you put in the passport, and so. But it was Canadians would go at that time to Cuba pretty regularly, or
Oh,
it wasn't. But yeah, in the U.S. that was banned, I guess. So,
huh.
but yeah, it was great. I think it was a lot of yeah, it was a really interesting experience. So
Oh, that's
yeah.
cool. That's cool. Well, so where did you grow up?
Oh, so I grew up in northern British Columbia. It's about 1,000 kilometers north of Vancouver, and yeah, so that's where I grew up. I was born, well, I was raised for the first 5 years of my life on a ranch. And the interesting thing about this ranch is the only way in or out was by float plane, horse, or in the
Oh,
winter you
hey.
could go by snowmobile. So it was, yeah. So it was south of a town called Vanderhoof, which is that's Vanderhoof is actually the geographic center of British Columbia. So if you
Oh,
wanted to
wow.
find it,
I
yeah.
don't know this geography very well. What's all around you?
Lots of trees and lakes. So yeah, so it's the
That's
closest
pretty
lar
deep, right? That's pretty deep into Canada.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So it's you drive a full day north and you're about halfway up the province. And
Oh,
if you keep going, maybe 2 more days, you'll get to Whitehorse, which is the capital of the Yukon Territory.
oh,
Yeah, so it's and the town I grew up in, I lived on this ranch, which might have that had about 12 people maybe, until I was about five. And then after that, I grew up in this town, Vanderhoof, which is about 4,000 people. And then I
oh,
was
wow.
there, yeah, until I graduated from high school, and then did my undergrad at Simon Fraser, which is in Vancouver. Yeah.
What'd your parents do for a living?
Well, early on, my dad and his family were ranchers. So they were originally from Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota region. And I think because there was cheap land in Canada, my grandfather, yeah, ended up moving to Canada. I remember the story is at one point they were deciding between Brazil or Canada, and
Huh.
then ended up going to Canada. So it was a large ranch. I don't know how many thousands of acres. And then, as far as I understand, they crossbred cows and yaks to have a more hardy animal that could survive the winters, where it gets down to -40 for a couple of weeks a year in the area. And then, so did that, yeah, did that for the first 5 years of my life. And then
Do you remember much about that?
not really. A few memories. Like one memory is I was on the back of a wagon laying on a pile of hay.
Huh,
And I guess a horse didn't like me and then grabbed me by the jacket and then lifted me
screw
up and
you.
threw me off. And so that's one memory. The other memory is one of my first memories. I know this is a little bit sad. Um, the homes were built by my parents, my uncles, my grandfather, and they were all log homes. So it's like wooden trees. And the way you'd build the floors, you would cut the logs in half, and there'd be a flat side, and then you would put the logs together, the flat parts, and then that'd be the floor. But then there were these little cracks in the floors, right? Anytime you have a log home, there's little cracks. So my first memory, I think it's a real memory, is I got toys at Christmas, and then they fell down through the cracks of the floor. And then yeah, and so that was kind of one of the memories.
You lost them.
I lost the
You
toy.
like
I
could
I
see
must
them
have got
every
it back. I was probably sad for at least momentarily.
day.
I'm sure you could crawl under and get it. But yeah, so there's a few scattered memories, but yeah, not a lot. And then some. Yeah.
Did your parents move or did your whole family move?
Uh, pr
Your extended family?
yeah, my extended family. So it was my grandfather and grandmother, and he was
No,
kind
I
of the.
mean, when you moved when you were five,
Oh,
was
when I was 5. Yeah, it was kind of essentially my whole family. So what had
oh,
happened is my grandfather had an accident. Like he was riding a horse in the rain, the horse slipped, and then the saddle hit him in the back of his head, and then he ended up dying. And then
oh.
after that, the whole family moved away from the ranch, and then yeah, and moved to
Did
this
they sell
town.
the ranch or something?
Yeah, yeah, they sold it. Yeah, and
It
then
just wasn't without your grandfather. Nobody wanted to do it.
yeah, I think they were there for a couple of years, and then but he was yeah, and then I think must have been less of a desire to be there amongst everyone else,
Oh,
and maybe it was a bit of a sad place to be after he passed away as
sure.
well. So yeah,
So what, aunts and uncles?
yeah, aunts and uncles, yeah, a number of
Huh.
aunts and uncles, and then everyone grew up in this small town called Vanderhoof, which was about
Mm,
4,000 people. Yeah, and so
mm.
yeah,
So where'd you move to again?
after that.
Yeah.
You mean? So then after graduating high school, went to
You said you moved when you were five, right?
oh yeah, to a place called Vanderhoof.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
when you moved to
yeah,
Vanderhoof.
that's when we moved to Vanderhoof.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
from
So
this
why'd they move
ranch.
there?
It was the closest town. So, and yeah, I don't know. I think they had friends there, and it was the town that they would go into, once or twice a year to get provisions. So it was the town I was born in. Like, so my mom took a float plane to the hospital, had
Mm,
me, was there for a few weeks, stayed with friends, and then came back to the ranch.
so
So yeah, so it was kind of the natural place. Yeah.
they're still ranchers when you move? That's what
No,
they do?
no, my dad opened a automobile insurance company. My grandmother was a bookkeeper. And actually my uncle though still did ranching. Yeah. So, and my
Hmm.
cousins are, yeah, still
Your
doing.
dad, he was entrepreneurial?
Yeah, yeah, I think it was quite entrepreneurial. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Huh.
He really he enjoyed learning. He didn't really have an opportunity to go to university because they were on the ranch, but really enjoyed
Um,
learning and read a lot and was quite intellectual
huh.
and entrepreneurial. Yeah, really ambitious. Yeah. So,
Huh.
yeah.
So did you have what were your like favorite games and stuff to do in this new town when you were growing up?
Oh, growing up, played softball, enjoyed that. Played sports,
Oh.
basketball. Trying to think about what else. There was no football. I was really into football, but it was such a small town. There was no football team.
Mm,
So I remember that was like a big dream of mine, which was to become a football player, and there's no football. And
no
I
football.
doubt I would have anyways. But like, yeah. And so yeah, just the usual typical things. So it was a good place to grow up in. You could walk around. You had lots of freedom as a kid back then, and so
Yeah.
yeah. So it was really, really,
Were
really
you a
fun
reader
experience.
like your dad?
A little bit, but not so much. Yeah, I was never really great in school. And so got, I don't know, B's, C's all through school. And then in 12th grade, I realized, well, the easiest way to kind of leave the town or kind of expand my horizons is to go to university.
Mm,
And so then you got to get into university. And so then kind of 12th grade, I kind of really applied myself and got enough grades that were good enough to get into university.
Your
So
goal
yeah,
was to get out of town more
yeah,
so
I
than
think so.
like becoming a more so than like I want to be this career thing. It was like I want to leave this town.
Yeah, I think it was just an immediate goal. Like, yeah, so
It was too small.
yeah, I think so. And it's a lot of. I remember one teacher telling me, high school teacher, you don't think of it now, but when you're 40, 50, you're going to realize that it's not great to do manual labor. So my
Yeah.
goal was to have an occupation where I wasn't doing manual labor.
Mm,
And it just, I worked all through high school about 20 hours a week.
mm.
And, you know, it's like, certain jobs are not very interesting. So like one job I had in was like stacking boxes on an assembly line at the end of assembly line. You do that 8 hours a day. So my goal was to do something, yeah, more interesting and also to
Mm.
meet new people, meet girls,
Yeah.
a town
Right.
of 4,000. It's growing up. I literally would almost never meet someone new, and so
Sure.
it's,
Sure.
yeah. And so and then going to a big city is, especially coming from Vancouver, super scary. So it's like,
Yeah.
well, but if I, go to university, live in residence, that's going to be, something
Uh,
that's a bit. So that was, yeah, I really just saw that kind of, okay, take a next step and yeah, broaden my horizons. So.
I don't know a lot about the Canadian system. I don't know a lot about Simon Fraser. What's that? Where is that school? Is that sort of one of the more selective schools?
So yeah, I don't want to insult it, but I'd say like usually typically ranked lower than University of British Columbia. It
Uh-huh.
doesn't have a medical school, it doesn't have a law school, or at least at the time it may have changed. And it's in the suburbs of Vancouver. So it's in a place called
Oh.
Burnaby. Yeah. So it's kind of, you can kind of think about UBC being the more urban, larger school, and then
Mm,
SFU being the second school, and it was also built in the 1960s as well.
mm,
So yeah, and then the reason I went there, I remember being in the office of my career counselor and just leafing through the books of the different universities. I started at leaf through and got to this field that was called communications. And it had a
mhm.
lot about, you could study pop music, you could study advertising. And so I thought, wow, that looks really fun. And then Simon Fraser was the only university that had that program. So I ended up
Mm.
just applying there and then going there. And so
How
yeah,
do you
that's
find economics?
I found. So I started in this field of communications, and you would read a lot of sociology and stuff like that. And then I felt like these are really cool topics they're talking about. They're talking about hegemony, kind of people's psychology, social structures in the world. But then I felt like it was just talking, 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 talking. And I was like, wow, this 20-page article could have been distilled to one page, right? And it seems like
Right.
they're using a lot of big words and like trying to make it more complicated. So that's on that side. But then because I was in this field, I had to take a few economics courses. And
Oh,
then
you had to.
yeah, because it was kind of like you're on the marketing side, and that was one aspect of it. So,
Got it.
and then I thought, wow, econ's completely different. Tons of precision. They're just using like plain language. You have these graphs. You can understand complex phenomena. And
Hmm.
then when I took an advanced game theory course or a game theory course, I remember, wow, this is really amazing. Like I can really understand real world phenomena
Mm.
and it's a lot of precision. So then I just kind of gravitated to that and ended up doing something that was, I think, I believe a double major in communications and then, but also economics. So yeah,
Mm.
so that's kind of, yeah, how I gravitated
It's
towards that.
like it's not that you're being drawn to like sometimes you'll talk to economists, they're like, well, I was really good in math.
Hmm.
And or they'll be or more, it's like I wanted to study public policy. But
Yeah.
it's kind of like you were drawn to this like desire to understand the world kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's more about like people. Like, why do people behave like this? Why is the world
Mm.
unequal? Why do we, think certain, yeah, why do we have laws? Why do we support laws? Why do we not support laws? And even
Mm.
like social interactions, right? Like between groups. I was interested in like different genres of music and how they form like different groups that have their own, like what now I would call them cultures or different, views or
Oh.
perspectives. So a lot of the social, just everyday, day-to-day stuff, I was kind of like really interested in.
Huh.
And yeah, communications was great for that, but it was, like I said, There was kind of the downside where it was, not precise enough for my liking. Yeah.
Mm.
And maybe not empirical enough either, right? In terms
But
of,
you could tell as an undergrad, you could tell that economics was very broad and would allow you to sort of to do a lot of things.
yeah.
You could tell.
Yeah, definitely. I think I lucked out and had some really good teachers.
Mm.
There's a guy named Larry Boland at SFU, Doug Allen. Doug's still there. Kevin Wainwright, who is a sessional lecturer, and kind of they had classes that were like very applied. I remember Kevin Wainwright, it's basically went over the hoteling model, but he said, why is it that when you see gas stations are always like kitty corner to each other or clumped together? And then went through, this kind of a hoteling model. And then it was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Why would there be two Starbucks kitty corner, which there wasn't Vancouver at the time, right? Like, why would that doesn't make sense? Like, and so then he talked about, oh, this is why, and this is the type of good that would generate that homogeneous goods. And I remember that was one example. And then I go tell my friends, and then they would think that's really cool, even, 'cause, so just like, yeah, understanding the world, things like that.
Yeah.
So it's like super interesting, right? Yeah. So,
Well, what do you want to be when you grow up, when you're like maybe junior or senior in college? Are you wanting to
uh,
be an economist?
no, not at that point, actually. So at that point, I had a really good summer job, which was working in a paint factory. So it was like a union job. And
Mm,
at the time, you made $18 an hour. This would be in the 90s. And so that was
a lot of money.
fantastic. Yeah. And so at the time, I thought, well, I worked every summer, I could get on there full time. And that's what I thought. I thought this is more money than I thought growing up in Vanderhoof I would earn.
Yeah.
And it was actually like the work that you could, if you worked your way up, was less laborious, is kind
Mhm.
of better. It was basically making paint. So I thought, okay, that's great. And so after I graduated, I did that. And then got laid off basically. And so,
Oh,
yeah. So
in
then,
college?
well, this was after the end of college. Like,
I
so,
see.
so I
Okay.
graduated and then said, okay, I won't work here just in the summers. I'll work here full time. And
Yeah.
then there were some issues, and then it got laid off, just a lack of demand, I think, for like, yeah. And and it was seasonal work anyway, so most workers would only work part of the year because there's more demand for
I see.
paint in the summer. Um, so then I worked some not odd jobs, but like temporary jobs. I worked at a ski hill, local ski hill, Cypress Bowl, in the ski school doing some stuff. So got free passes and did a lot of skiing. Worked at a book publisher company in the warehouse,
Mhm.
and then both of those jobs were kind of temporary too. They're not career
Are you
jobs.
staying in the same city when you're doing all this?
Yeah, all of this is in Vancouver.
This is
Yeah,
all in Vancouver. Are
yeah,
you liking the city? Do you
yeah,
feel
yeah,
like you're like a city mouse more than a country
yeah.
mouse this time?
Yeah, yeah. I think at that time for sure. Then I kind of really, had enough of the country. Had enough of
Yeah.
camping, all these sorts of things that you do,
Uh-huh.
hiking, and yeah, really was enjoying all the urban aspects of Vancouver.
What'd
Yeah.
you enjoy doing at Vancouver after college? What kind of
Uh,
leisure?
for leisure, I did a lot of rock climbing actually.
Mm.
So that's and then just like hanging out in the city, like doing the type of things that young people do, going to
Yeah.
clubs. At the time, raves were big, so going to raves.
Mhm.
And yeah, just meeting lots of people, socializing. Yeah, yeah,
Mm.
doing that. Snowboarding, I guess it did that as well.
You
And
were
so,
always
yeah.
very social. I'm trying to detect a little bit. It seems like you've mentioned lots of hanging out with friends and stuff. You were always social.
Yeah, I guess, it seems like in your 20s, everyone's social or more social than
Hmm.
than now. Now I really enjoy the time in my office alone,
Yeah.
being able to think and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm not the most social person, but really think in your early 20s, that's when when I look back, I was definitely more social than I am now. And
Well,
so,
so when do you get
yeah.
this bug to go to grad school?
So then I, so then it's kind of like looked for work with an undergrad degree in economics,
Right.
and then really didn't find much. So
This
then I
was
thought,
like 98.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So, um, And then in Canada, what you have, which is different than the US, is it's very common to have a terminal master's, like just a master's
Hmm.
degree, and that's the main, a bit like LSE and yeah, other
Yeah.
European schools. So that was a natural next step. Went to Toronto to do a master's, and I thought if I get a master's degree, then I can get a job in the government or, and
Mm.
so yeah, so most of those jobs, anything like beyond a bank teller or, working in a bank
Hmm.
required a master's degree. And so that's what I did. Yeah, went to Toronto, did a master's degree, and then was really enjoying it. It was really challenging. There was a big jump for me from undergrad to master's, just in the rigor, how everything was mathematized,
Mm.
and but did well in the end. And was really enjoying it. And then a lot of people encouraged me to continue to do a master's, or sorry, a PhD at Toronto, and then I did
Oh,
that.
they did.
Yeah, yeah,
They
yeah.
could tell. Why do you think? What did they notice? You think?
I
Were
don't
you
know.
like, coming alive a little bit in the master's program?
A little bit. I remember yeah, yeah. I think I had good grades, and that's probably the main thing they noticed. But
Uh-huh.
yeah, but I'd have to go back and ask some of them who were, yeah, who had encouraged me. Um, I remember my initial plan was, and was to actually transfer to UMass Amherst
Really?
because yeah, I was so what I was really interested in that time was what we called now history, or at the time too, history of thought.
Yeah.
And so I had um, a number of really interesting courses at SFU on Marxist economics. So we read
Yeah, that would be
Capital,
the place to go.
yeah. And so then I thought, oh, Sam Bowles, Herbert Gintis, yeah, a
Yeah.
lot of people there. It just all seemed really appealing. And then,
Yeah.
yeah, but they convinced me that, well, to stay in Toronto. And then also my wife was doing a master's. And so it would have been, we'd have to have been separated.
In
And so,
economics, she's doing a
yeah,
master's in
yeah, she
economics.
did a master's in economics. And then,
Oh,
yeah,
so that y'all are both at Toronto? She's at Toronto?
at the same time. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Oh, okay.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Did y'all
yeah.
meet in the program?
No, we met it in Simon Fraser in a one of these Marxist economics classes,
Oh,
and
wow.
an econometrics class. Yeah, so we had these multiple classes together. And that
Hmm.
was in 1997. Yeah,
So Simon
and
Fraser had had a few heterodox kind of professors.
yeah, 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 yeah. There was a few, yeah, and
Oh,
they had
cool.
some, yeah, yeah, yeah. So it was cool. It just happened to be, yeah, that there were some professors who were kind of
Oh,
interested in kind of these more diverse things.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
So
did it talk
the
you into staying at Toronto? Are you thinking, well, since I'm going to do the PhD, was it just only Amherst or did you send out a lot of applications?
No, it was only Amherst. Yeah. And so,
Oh,
and I got in and they said, oh, even if you want to come visit. And so there was some email exchanges. And then I looked into like, this is before Google Maps, but like trying to calculate how far it is from Toronto to Amherst. It's not
yeah.
close. It's not
Right,
commutable.
right.
And how do you do the train? And I think you'd have to go to New York or something. And so it wasn't easy. So then it just wasn't, yeah, it wasn't too feasible.
Oh, because your wife is going to stay in Toronto.
Yeah, because she would have been in Toronto, and so like,
I
could
see.
I commute every week or something? And then it
I
just
see.
it didn't seem feasible. And
Okay.
then yeah, and then the profs at Toronto were which is right that said, oh, your job prospects will be better, if you stay in Toronto. And so
Mm,
and yeah, so I kind of stayed in Toronto and then explored some of the kind of off the wall, topics that I was kind of interested in,
yeah.
but at Toronto. So which
Yeah,
was
yeah, yeah. Wait,
well.
does your wife end up doing a PhD also?
No, she did a master's, finished, and then she worked at the provincial government, which is in Toronto. And so
I
she
see.
did, yeah. So she was kind of employed as an economist for the 5 years that I was doing my
Oh,
PhD. And so, yeah,
okay.
that was the setup we had basically.
Well, so what's it like when you get into, because I haven't heard you say anything math like I was great in math. I haven't heard you even say the word math yet. So what was it
No,
like? What was it like in those first year PhD courses? Were you
uh,
ready? Been done that master's?
yeah, I think it was for me, the big jump was from undergrad to master's because the
Oh, what?
master's was, yeah. And so, um, so just like for econometrics, if you're deriving the OLS estimator, I think undergrad, we would do the case with no covariates. You wouldn't use
Yeah.
matrix algebra.
Hmm.
And then you would, derive it with matrix algebra and the masters, and so that was the big jump really
Yeah.
for me. And it is like probably the Canadian masters. It might be somewhere in between a first year PhD and undergrad, and yeah, in other
Mhm.
places. And so that was the big jump. Yeah, but it was just like, you just had to learn it all, and then do it and work hard. And so, but it definitely wasn't the case that it was easy for me. Like it was kind of like the first year of the PhD, that's all I was doing. It's not like I'm doing a
Yeah.
research paper on the side, or going and skiing every weekend or something.
Right,
It
right, right.
was, yeah, just kind of really, really doing that and getting myself immersed. And Toronto at the time, I don't know what they're like now. At the time, they really tried to emulate Chicago.
Mm.
And so the way they did that was to fail half of the first year
Oh, really?
PhD. Yeah. So they're like, we're the Chicago of Canada, or they'd say,
Chicago, Canada.
or Chicago's the Toronto of the US. Like, that'd be the
Yeah,
joke.
exactly.
So they kind of said that at the beginning, like we don't, yeah, our PhD students shouldn't have any spare time, and you should, and it's
Uh,
true, like half the class failed out. Yeah. So I think we started with 15 maybe and ended up with about,
I think that wasn't an uncommon model back then, because
yeah,
that was even at my university.
yeah, same
Uh,
thing.
it seemed like it was. I mean, I get the sense now it's there's been like a philosophical change or something.
Yeah.
Generally, people
Yeah.
they want to bring people in and then they all finish or something. But
Yeah.
so how big was your cohort?
In the end, it's probably about 6 people that were on the market, maybe.
Mm,
And like I said, I think if my memory's right, we started about 15. Some would drop right away. Some realized, yeah, it wasn't for them. And then the
mm,
big thing was we had comprehensive exams. So I think in
yeah,
micro and macro. And so that's where a lot of people, yeah, I think
yeah,
a
yeah,
big, a
yeah.
big chunk didn't pass the first time, and then they'd have to, yeah, do it again at the end of
Mm.
summer. And I think I passed the first time, so that was great. And yeah, and so yeah, but it was genuinely uncertain, and I definitely worked as hard as I could. Yeah, and so yeah, I didn't have
So
much
you
spare time.
finish, you pass your prelims, you
Yeah.
finish, you start taking field courses that second year.
Hmm.
Are you immediately drawn to like development and trade and history? Is it like you can see that happening already back then?
Yeah, I think so to some extent, but the first thing I think I'm drawn to is game theory.
Really?
So yeah, so the first person I'm talking to seriously is a game theorist called Martin Osborne, who's there.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, he's there.
Yeah, yeah. So he's there,
Oh.
and worked with him a lot. He was great, super supportive of all these. So I was thinking of game theory, but then applied to like macro level political economy questions. So
Mm,
like at the time, Herschel Grossman hadn't passed away, and so it was his type of research about conflict versus production, uh, and also evolutionary game theory, like Peyton
mm,
Young. I remember reading him, and so like yeah, I was really inspired by all of this Bowles and Gintis, like really. And so yeah, so worked with him a lot, and my first paper that I wrote was kind of an evolutionary game theory model about conflict
mm.
versus cooperation, and applied to colonialism in Africa. And so,
Oh, so
yeah,
you were already, even with the game theory, you were kind of interested in development or or
yep,
like historical evolving of th like
yep,
societies.
yep, exactly. Yeah,
Huh.
of all the full menu of game theory, the one that really appealed to me was evolutionary game
Was
theory.
evolutionary
Yeah.
game
So
theory.
it's not just we have a Nash equilibrium, we're there, we're not, but it's actually like, how do we evolve to that equilibrium? Can we evolve to different equilibrium? Let's understand the
Mm,
basin of attraction. Can shocks move you from one basin of attraction to the other?
mm.
Yeah, that was really the type of thing. So I read a lot outside of econ, because evolutionary game theory is not the, really mainstream within econ,
Yeah.
but other stuff, yeah, outside of econ. And some economists like I said, Bowles and Gintis.
Did Dr. Osborne have a lot of knowledge of that area? I mean, he's like so premier in general, but like,
Yeah.
was that sort of things he had already begun investing in also, or was it new for him that your interest in this evolutionary game theory was also sort of newer for him?
No, he was knowledgeable. At the time, he was writing an undergrad textbook, and which
Uh-huh.
has come out. I think it's just called Game Theory. And it was after his kind of he has this well-known book with Ariel Rubinstein,
Yeah.
Bargaining in Markets. So it's after
Uh,
that he's writing this undergrad textbook, and then he has one chapter that's on evolutionary game theory. So I think he has like a really good knowledge of like the full spectrum of
yeah.
yeah. And so yeah, so he was kind of fully supportive, and I think he found it interesting that I was trying to apply this to these different
But you're
scenarios.
applied. That's one thing I'm hearing you say.
Yeah.
It's like you said you're interested in game theory, but it was like it was applied. You were very much an applied person,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I
right?
wasn't going to be innovating on the pure technical side or anything like that.
Right.
It's kind of
Right.
like yeah, and so and I could see these are really helpful tools. There's insights, and then they could be applied to understand the world, and that's kind of what I
Yeah.
was interested in doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So, um, but do you not make game theory like a field? Do you start shopping around other field courses that you're more interested in?
Yeah, so kind of how it happened is I had developed this model, which ended up being published in the Journal of Development Economics,
Oh, is
and
that that first that
yeah,
second article on your Vita?
yeah, exactly, yeah.
It's
So
like
that
oh 08. Okay.
yeah, that's the one. And so it was basically a model about how a temporary period of colonialism could have long-term permanent effects on the
Uh-huh.
continent of Africa by
Yeah.
moving you from one equilibrium to another. And it's yeah.
Oh,
And then so the model shows how naturally multiple equilibrium arise in this setting, and then how the shock um, could move you from one equilibrium to the other.
I think that Marxist stuff in undergrad was sort of percolating a little bit because you're interested in like colonialism and stuff.
Yeah, yeah, it's probably like some influence, right? Yeah, to think about power relations, which we
Yeah.
in Econ 101, neoclassical economics, perfect competition, there's no sense about power, right? And how
Right.
certain groups can influence other groups. And
Right.
yeah, everything's just kind of, always Pareto optimal. And so, yeah, I think that's right. I think that's right. And so,
Ah,
so I had the model. And then, of course, the first thing you need to do with the model is like read about the world qualitatively to make sure the model lines up. So then start reading a lot of African history to understand this
mm-hmm.
setting.
Mm.
And then when
Is
I
that
would,
your first time also? That's like this is where you're just for the first time studying African history
yeah,
in your life?
never took I don't even know if I'd taken a history course. Yeah. And so, but definitely never took an African history course, sat in on a course in grad school. But at that time, yeah, that's exactly right. Just
See.
started reading about it. Um, and then I remember I would present the paper, and then I would have a lot of qualitative evidence say, well, this fits with this. And then people would say, well, that's fine, but it'd be really great if you had actually hard data, and then you could test the model or validate the model.
Yeah.
And then that led me to when I was reading the history literature, um, I learned that actually African historians, unlike more so than other historians, I think, are quantitative. Like there's a lot of
Really?
data. Yeah, so they would, but what they would do is because with the slave trade, there's a lot of records, right?
Yeah.
Because these enslaved individuals are viewed as commodities, and there's slave shipment records, there's plantation inventories, there's all these sorts of things, and so
Hmm.
people would go to the archives and dig up this information, and it's all quantitative. And
Right.
then, but the typical historian would just report that all in the appendix of the book, and then write a
Uh-huh.
book that describes this and say, oh, look at these patterns. It's kind of interesting. Look that, yeah, there were this many women also enslaved, look at the age distribution, stuff like that. So I knew there
Mhm.
was a lot of information or a lot of data. And so
Wow.
that led me to then think about, oh, okay, can I take all of this information that's in the African history literature and then and then test exactly as people are suggesting, test some of these hypotheses. So if it's true that European contact caused underdevelopment in Africa, kind of a Walter Rodney type of hypothesis, then we should be able to show that in the data, right? And so the model had illustrated the mechanisms about, oh, how could that happen, right? What's the formalization of that story? But then the next step was to do the empirics, and then so that's kind of the subsequent step in the path in terms of research. So
Was that your job market paper, or was the one of those two your job market paper?
no, neither of those were. That was the paper that ended up in the QJE on the slave trade.
The African slave trade?
Yeah,
Oh, eight, I
exactly.
think.
Yeah,
Oh, nine.
exactly.
Yeah.
So it wasn't my job market paper, and I remember
And
Person I
that's a great non-job market paper.
yeah yeah. So I was fortunate on that
Everybody
one.
else is just writing hurrying to finish.
Yeah. So yeah, so it was I think a lot of people, which they are right, said this is a bit of a peculiar paper. It's not the typical paper that we see undergrads doing. And so it's probably not going to be your best job market paper. You know, it's not going to be strategically a good job market paper. It's going to be very risky.
Uh,
And I remember at the time, so the one person was talking a lot to, because he also was interested in these big picture, you know, kind of macro growth institutions type questions, was Dan Truffler, who's a
uh-huh.
trade economist who was there. Um,
Mm.
and then, so he was very supportive, but kind of said, "Oh, well, you know, this really can't be your job market paper. One, there's nobody who's kind of working in this field at Toronto, so they can't say, you know, I know African history or economic history really
Oh,
well,
I see.
and
Right.
you know, and Nathan's great. You know, Dan could write me a letter. He's a trade economist, and people will say, "Well, what do you know about African history?" And that's basically what he said. And I think at the time too, economic history wasn't as vibrant as it is now. And
Oh,
so, yeah,
really?
yeah, I think there's been a bit of resurgence. Um, and so,
You didn't self-identify as an economic historian while at Toronto. This was just kind of like because that's kind of, I like sort of
mhm.
like you're obviously like among other things, you're an economic historian, but like
Yeah.
you wouldn't have said that at Toronto. You don't have like an identity like that then.
I don't know if I would identify with anything just because you're a grad student just trying to survive
Yeah.
and trying to get through. But I would have in the sense that I went to economic history conferences, like so
Oh, okay.
Social Science History Association, which is very on the history side, the EHA, that's the Economic History Association. There was a Cliometrics conference. I went to that, I remember. Um,
Okay.
and at the time, and still now, the EHA is very good about bringing in young scholars and supporting them, providing funds to travel, making it a friendly
Mm.
place. And so that was one great thing. So met a lot of people. So if I was to say what field was I most connected to in undergrad, it would be economic history for sure.
You
Yeah.
say undergrad, but do you
Oh,
mean grad?
sorry. Oh, sorry. Grad school.
Oh,
In
got
grad
it.
school.
Okay,
Sorry.
yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah,
In
yeah, yeah.
grad school. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So you
So
did.
yeah.
That was a bit of your community.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I
Definitely. Yeah.
see.
Yeah. Yeah. So got to
But you're
know.
being advised to so what are you being advised to kind of go out more with this other paper? What is this other paper?
Yeah. So strategically, I think what I needed to do was to have a paper that's a bit more mainstream, that's in a field that the faculty are in. So it was to have the paper in international trade. And so that was
I
kind of the last paper to some extent of all the papers in my dissertation that I wrote. And it was one that's kind of more squarely in trade. It was still about institutions, which I was very interested in. And
Mhm.
and then that ended up being my job market paper. Yeah.
Is that your QJ, your O 07? What is the O 07 QJ, the first one?
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Oh, so it still did really well. So
Yeah.
you were swinging really you clearly were early on. They could tell, your professors could tell that you were talented. I mean, I guess you don't want to say that, but like it seems like it must have been pretty clear that that you were a real scholar. I mean, honestly, Nathan, coming from this little bitty town of like 4,000 people, were you surprised at Toronto that you were like you had this scholarly bend? You mentioned your dad was like this.
hmm I don't know. Yeah, I don't know that I thought about it a lot. I think, um, yeah, I think the main thing is I really, really enjoyed it. I was
You
like
did.
studying topics I really, really enjoyed.
I see.
Like the slave trade stuff I really enjoyed, but lots of classmates were wondering why, it's not the typical thing that a PhD in economics would be, doing for hours and hours a day is going through these, old sources, these secondary sources, putting together
So
these
what are
data.
you doing?
So,
Basically, there's all these books on the slave trade,
yeah,
tons of appendices, but
yeah,
nobody ever digitized it. It's just like you're gonna have to go through and create this large database.
yeah, exactly.
Oh, so
So
you just knew it was there.
yeah, so I knew it was there. And then
Oh,
the database is just reporting ethnic groups and then numbers in different
yeah,
samples all around the world, and
yeah.
then or mostly in the Americas. End up being, I think, about 100,000 enslaved people that are kind of tabulated. And then a big part of it was, oh, well, now we have all these ethnic groups. We got to figure
Wait a
out,
second. Is
yeah.
it individual level data? 100
Uh,
individual records?
the original records are individual level data, yeah. And then, but then
That's
they
what
end up,
you're tabulating?
well, and then they're usually summarized in the back of the book. So yeah, so I wouldn't go through that many lines. And then for some of the analysis, I did my own archival research. So I went to
Mm,
archives in Zanzibar.
mm,
Just because there was one slave trade, the Indian Ocean, or a couple Red Sea, which were there wasn't enough secondary information. So went
mhm.
there, and then in that case, that was individual level data that I was like
Oh,
tabulating, and so it'd be an individual record of individuals who were enslaved. You'd have their name, their ethnicity. Often the last name was the ethnicity. That's how you would know. And
yeah.
so yeah, so it's kind of that process. And then the bigger thing was you have to figure out, if it lists a particular ethnic group, like the Makwa, where are they on the continent, right? And so then it was actually mapping or trying to figure out where they are. And again, there were maps, but then they hadn't been digitized. And so kind of learning ArcGIS and then digitizing them and then being able to, tabulate them, link them to countries, things like
Yeah.
this. Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, so
Were
that was
you
the process.
surprised in that paper? Were you surprised by well, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
What if you think back to writing that 2008 term, the effects of African slave trades,
Hmm.
long-term effects. Was there a part of that project where empirically you were surprised by what you were doing or finding?
That's a good question. That project, a little less so because everything was kind of at the country level, macro level, right?
Mm,
And you could already see based on a reading of the literature, you
mm,
kind of have in your head, oh, these are areas that were more impacted. These were areas that were less impacted.
mm.
And then you kind of also know relative development of different areas. So not, I wasn't overly surprised that you got, maybe surprised at how strong the relationship was.
Mm.
But the thing that surprised me more was the second paper with Leonard Wanchicon, the one that's like links the slave trade to distrust. And
Oh,
so,
really?
yeah, so that one I was ex ante kind of skeptical, not skeptical, but like just had no strong priors, in part because, what do I know about interpersonal trust on the African continent, being an
Right.
outsider? And yeah, so my co-author knew a lot, Leonard Wanchicon. And he said, "Oh no, no, really think there's something here, based on my experience growing up in southern Benin." And
Mm.
so, and then then it was just like, okay, let's look at the data and see. And so,
This is still using the original historical records.
yeah, exactly. So I had compiled the data. It was at the country level for the original paper, but knew that, oh, well, we could get subnational estimates. The data are fine enough,
Yeah.
and so created those at the ethnicity level, and then linked it to the Afrobarometer, which was just coming out at the time. So this was a new data source of surveys across Africa, and then linked them up, and then and then looked at basically the relationship. And it turns out, yeah, Leonard was right that places that had more slave trade, people are, naturally less trusting of each other even today. So,
Is a theory about institutions and persistence and these like effects in the past, is a theory starting to kind of form in your mind at this time?
so I in grad school read a lot of research in evolutionary anthropology. And so
Mhm.
this would be the theory that I was reading was like Boyd and Richardson. They had mathematical models about cultural evolution. Um, and like I said, Peyton Young, maybe Jorgen Weibel a little bit.
Mhm.
Um, and so, but that's actually more about culture. And then there's a little bit of game theory. Like I remember Jean-Philippe Plateau had a nice paper or a book, Masahiko Aoki. And there were some nice books. Bowles and Gintis had some nice papers. So there's a little bit, but I was hadn't I'd kind of veered more towards empirics, like, and
Mm.
so yeah, and so I think even now,
But I'm
uh,
just thinking even
yeah,
things like Doug North and the
right,
full of institutions, and it's this like in history,
Hmm.
but it's like the institution seems like it could be things like you're describing, like
Yep.
even just trust itself could be an institution or these various things. And I was just
Yep.
curious, like, are you starting to have these big, even bigger thoughts after these early papers about
Yep. Yeah,
you
yeah,
are?
yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. So yeah, Red Dug North, Asamuglu Johnson Robinson had just come out
And it
2001.
had just come out.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so then suddenly um, I remember being on the market, everyone's talking about institutions and everyone's trying to say, my job market paper is about institutions because that's the
Um,
hot thing. So if you had a policy paper, you'd call it an institution.
you
And
call
so
it an
like, yeah, I
institution,
remember
right?
people.
That's a
So
Nash equilibrium.
yeah, exactly.
Everybody called
Yeah.
the same thing.
So, and I'm sure I did it. Like the slave trade led to underdevelopment because it deteriorated institutions, you know.
Right, right,
I'm
right,
sure
right,
I,
right.
yeah. But then actually the paper with Leonard, it's really not about institutions. In some sense, we try to control for the quality of institutions around you,
Mm.
and then that
Oh,
leading
it's
to
just
bad
distrust.
behavior. Yeah, it's more of this cultural transmission from parents to children, telling them, "Oh, be careful, you know, be careful, don't trust others," you know. And that's
Oh,
really culture. And at the time, culture, there is a literature, but it wasn't like I think now has become more mainstream. People will use the term. It was and I think institutions was a stepping stone or kind of a natural first step, and social capital as well.
that's different from
Yeah.
psychology, though. You've said culture a couple of times.
Hmm.
You're seeing it as this thing you're calling culture. The
Yeah.
distrust is not like this individual thing. Like I am just now a not trusted because I
Yeah.
think actually I'm not positive about this, but I wonder if people actually first go to individual beliefs as just individual beliefs, but you're seeing it as something more than that.
Yeah, part of it's terminology. So this is, I guess,
Oh,
using the term culture or cultural trait from the evolutionary anthropology literature. So, which is an issue. I think terminology is a big issue within the literature. But really, what cultural is like a value, a belief, a moral that an individual holds, right? So at the individual level. And then just the second part in the literature is that can be transmitted or communicated between people. So if parents teach
mm.
their children certain values,
Oh,
that's then culture, and the values they teach are is a cultural trait, right?
culture is transmittable.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's what.
Oh,
Yeah. So in the literature, an interesting question is like humans have culture because we transmit knowledge, values. Do any animals have culture? Like, do
right.
birds have culture?
Yeah.
Do chimpanzees have culture? And there's neat experiments it's basically, is there social learning amongst other animals? And there's a great book by Joe Henrich called Secret of Our Success, which is
Mhm.
basically saying what makes humans so successful compared to other primates or other animals. It's because we have culture. We can learn something, communicate it to someone else. They can improve upon it, communicate it to someone else. And yeah. And so that's how we get this
Getting
accumulated
back to your
knowledge.
communication interests.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, exactly.
Huh.
Everything comes full circle. But yeah.
It does seem like a very rich topic because it seems like it can branch off so many new ideas to work on.
Yep. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's exactly right. So
Huh.
yeah. Yeah, I agree.
So you only stay at UBC for like 3 years, 2 or 3 years.
2 years. Yeah. Yeah,
Two
yeah. Two
years.
years. Yeah.
Did you
Yeah,
have a
yeah.
feeling that it would be temporary when you took the job?
No, no, no. I thought it would be permanent. I'm from Vancouver. When I was on the market, I was very fortunate. It's not like the market is now. There was lots of opportunities.
Yeah.
I could have been in different cities, which are and very good departments. And then, but I knew UBC, I knew the people, and I just thought, oh, that's a good fit. And so, and yeah, and so I
You
thought it
had
would
a
be permanent.
geographic preference. You sort of wanted to stay.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah. So for whatever reason, I don't know why. Maybe it's just yeah, the kind of small town culture embedded in me that I just never wanted to leave Canada. It's
So
like
why do you leave? I mean, I know it's like must have killed you to go to Harvard, but like, I mean,
yeah, exactly.
like what exactly is going on back then to that would lead, I guess it's a pull probably, right?
Yeah,
Not.
yeah, exactly, exactly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
What happened?
I didn't apply to Harvard or anything like that, but I got an email that said, "Oh, we may have missed." Actually, Robert Barrow knows this. And we joke about it. I got an email from Robert Barrow that said, "Oh, we may have overlooked you on the market 2 years ago. Do you want to come and give a job talk?"
What did
And
you think when you got that email?
no, I was very surprised. I was like, and I had no like, yeah, no desire to leave Vancouver or UBC. I was very happy and was like at the time, was being productive. I was
Yeah.
those two papers that we just talked about were published in the QJE, which is
Yeah.
really
So
why I
Barrow
was,
had seen it. Had he handled
yeah,
the papers?
no, Ed Glazer handled both of them,
But
and
he
so
had seen them because they all have to read each other, right? Like
yeah,
the.
yeah, yeah, I think so. And
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
maybe why my name came up or,
Right.
that
Right.
sort of
Right.
thing.
Right.
And so yeah, so then I can't turn this down. And one thing
Yeah.
that's kind of funny, in fairness to them, they didn't overlook me. I didn't apply to Harvard.
I was about to say it's easy to overlook somebody if they don't send the application in.
Yeah, I remember my advisors being like, no, 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 you have to be a complete genius to go there. Don't even bother. So I think
Oh,
it might have been the only place I didn't apply to, actually. So,
Nathan, would you call yourself like easily intimidated? Was it like, or is it kind of like, I'll go to Harvard, and it's like you're not really an intent because in some ways you're having you have success so quickly, but I'm just curious, like some people would have been insecure,
yeah, 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 yeah. So.
and I'm just curious, like, what's your personality like?
I think for me, two things like kept the stress level really, really low. I think like one thing is I really just enjoy doing the research,
Right.
and that's really like career aspirations, that sort of thing, really didn't, isn't something that was on my rate. If I have a good job, I have a paycheck and can do
Mm,
research, then I'm very happy.
mm,
Um, so that I think that was an important thing. And then I was also like very happy at UBC. Like, and
mm,
so when I went and did the job talk, I think, I thought, oh, I'll go do a department job talk at Harvard. That's a good thing. Lots of people will see my research, and if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. And
yeah.
then same thing when they hired me, then it's like, oh, okay, if I get tenure, great. If I don't get tenure, so I didn't feel like I would, it's obviously better. You want to achieve the
Yeah.
goal in front of you, but I didn't feel like, oh, my life is, will be terrible if I don't get tenure, because then I can
Right.
go back
Right.
to UBC and UBC kind of said that. It's like, oh, go, if you don't get tenure, come back, and so they were very supportive.
Mm.
And so just focused on the research, which I was really enjoying. And so, yeah. And so that's kind of the attitude that
How
I,
did it feel? What felt different when you get there? Because you would now have two assistant professor experiences at the same
Mhm.
time. So how would you explain to somebody, this is how I would compare my life, what it was like as I was forming at UBC and then as I was forming at Harvard? Is it different?
Yeah, no, Harvard's just amazing. Like, so first of all, this is, kind of before the internet's really taken off. So you don't even know what these names look like, these people that you read and then you're meeting them for the first time. So I
Yeah.
remember like meeting, yeah. And so that's kind of neat. And then there's just like particularly at Harvard, a super deep pool of people interested in different things. So then you're
Hmm.
going to find somebody who's interested in, kind of the exact same, not the exact same things, but the general area of things that you're also interested in. So I think that's a really great thing about Harvard, right? It's just that there's so many people interested in so many different things
So
that
who
then
are you matching with intellectually and socially when you get there?
probably a lot of people, but like the biggest one I think is James Robinson, who was there
Oh,
at the
yeah.
time in the Kennedy
Yeah.
School, or sorry, in the School of Government. Robert Bates as well, and then there was an African historian named Emmanuel Achiampong. So I remember
Oh,
the three of us would meet regularly for lunch
yeah.
and just a standing date, if you want to call it that, and
Yeah.
just chat about research, about ideas, about history.
Mm,
And so I think that was, and then we ended up organizing a conference in Ghana and being on some grants together, and
mm,
we actually had an edited book that we did together too.
mm.
And so yeah, so that's an example. Another one is then I started co-teaching a PhD program with James Robinson,
Oh, you
and so
did?
yeah, sorry, a PhD class with James
What
Robinson.
was it?
It's what's called comparative historical economic development.
Had there
So
been a class like that before?
not really. So I had taught it solo for a few years, and then and then we teamed up. And so, but before that, there wasn't. Yeah, it was kind of like a class that counted for history, development, and political economy for the
Oh, it drew
PhD.
from like a bunch of different students.
Yeah, yeah, and we would have students from. I remember there's students from sociology, political science regularly, even a
Mm,
few history students, and so yeah, and a
yeah,
lot of econ students. Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
it was
yeah.
fun. Yeah, it was very fun. So
That's cool.
yeah.
I had a person email me and ask me to ask more of the guests this. Um, they want to know what a typical day is like for you. What was it like for you as an assistant professor, as a graduate student, and what is it like now? Like just a
Mm.
random work day, weekday.
Oh, okay. So I think grad school, it was like 12 hours of work. So yeah, and so yeah, so doing, whatever it is you're doing, if it's like working on one model or writing a paper or tabulating these data or running regressions. And so then yeah, it's just like a lot of work. I remember not a ton of emails, not a ton of meetings, and so that's in grad school. And then it just slowly, as you know, changes over time. It's like less time for work, more emails, more meetings with students,
Yeah.
now more Zoom calls. And so if you kind of today, what I try and do is, whatever work I'm doing, which is research related, do that in the morning and when my
Mhm.
mind's fresh. And then I'll usually have meetings with students or other things in the afternoon. And so,
Mm,
but usually I can only carve out, 2 or 3 hours that aren't,
right.
yeah, these other Zoom calls or meetings and that sort of thing.
Mm.
So, yeah. So,
I was surprised when I read that you were going back to UBC. Was that something that had been sort of kind of bubbling for a little while? Back in 21, you go back
yeah,
to home.
yeah, so definitely like couldn't have been happier at Harvard. So it's like a
Yeah.
fantastic place, super stimulating. Like I said, there's always people coming through. It's like really, really, really amazing.
Mm,
I think there's always been the Canadian draw, and my wife is from Vancouver as well. So I think you probably know with the life cycle, parents get older. Being closer to parents is more important. Being closer
yeah.
to family becomes more important.
Yeah.
And so if you put it like in purely economic terms, I think like as you get older, the importance of these family connections is increasing. And but also as you get older, the importance of the academic connections is decreasing because you kind of know people in the profession and all these sorts
Right.
of things. And
Right.
so then I think it's just a time when one dominates the other, right? And so
Yeah.
and the other thing is like UBC, particularly for the fields I work in, have really, really, really great scholars.
Mm,
And there's, yeah, um, so like Claudio Ferraz, Patrick Francois, Siobhan Anderson, they're all working in the
mm,
same area. And then the psych department here is really, really good as well. And I knew a
yeah.
number of people in the psych department
Yeah.
who were, yeah. And so I didn't feel like, oh, intellectually, I'll really be wanting. I'm like, it'll be enough for sure to keep me satisfied, and then you have everything else. And so that was,
Mm,
yeah, that was basically the logic. I'm sure that like Trump getting into power and causing instability and uncertainty,
yeah.
which we're realizing,
Yeah.
I could foresee that a little bit, and so that didn't help us
Yeah. Yeah.
want to
Yeah.
stay in the U.S. So yeah,
I see.
yeah.
I got it.
So
Got it.
that's basically it. Yeah.
Right. Right. Well, I want to end on this. You've had such a great career and you're still really young. And so I'm just curious, as you think about this like anonymous student,
Hmm.
there's some anonymous PhD student out there, maybe they're in Europe, maybe they're in Asia, maybe they're, like at a lower ranked school, a higher ranked school, whoever. Um, what do you wish if you had to just sort of if you had to kind of share with them what you've learned and what you wish you could go back and tell that person now, whatever it is. It could be, like I think that really I didn't realize that this is, like the things I would like to say, or I actually, have always known it was this, and it turns out that I was right. What do you think that you would mind sharing with somebody like that?
Yeah, so I think one thing when I look back that I was really fortunate about, or was maybe just dumb luck, is that I was kind of, I don't know if I'd say sufficiently oblivious that I didn't question what I was doing, if that makes sense. Like now, if I was um, thinking more about the type of research that I did at the time, I would have been maybe a bit more hesitant. Does that make
Yeah,
sense? Like to
right,
do all
right,
this slave trade stuff and so and I would say, oh yeah, yeah, I would just I think now, and I've kind of developed, yeah, I would just be, I would second guess myself more, which is not a good thing. So I think I was, which I can see that as well, like, and I think it's just very natural. It's like whatever research you're doing, things have become so competitive. It's so hard to publish in top journals that you really are second guessing yourself or thinking about whatever project that you're taking on.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, I don't know what the advice is, but my guess a little bit is often with projects, it's very easy early on to see all of the issues because we're
Yeah,
really trained in all of our classes to identify issues. And then you can't see the solutions or the second, third, fourth step you're going to take that will really make this excellent, right? So
yeah.
often I think this kind of hesitancy or second guessing ourselves, I think, is something that impedes us doing
Mm,
things. And so, and part of it is just that things are so competitive, so you don't want to take a few missteps or spend a lot of time doing something that isn't fruitful. But then, sometimes you just have to go. So I don't know what the advice is, but but for me, I think a little bit just being off the map in Toronto and then not having
mm,
being a bit oblivious and just doing this stuff and not knowing
right.
was in hindsight a good thing. And then I guess just the one piece of advice is like, which I always give students is really make sure that you choose something that you're really, 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 really passionate about
Yeah,
because then the reward is learning and the research and better understanding the world in that dimension. If you're
yeah,
doing it because you think, oh, this is a hot topic or strategically this is what the market,
yeah,
then the reward is really contingent on all those sorts of things, like
yeah.
how well you do. And that's super, super, super stressful.
And you have almost no control over that
Yeah,
anyway.
you have no control. Like,
Right.
think of the market this year and probably, the next few years. It's just like these macro shocks, the world's
Yeah,
unstable, bad timing. But if you're really like your enjoyment comes from doing the research, learning, then you have that. And that's the vast majority. And yeah,
yeah.
and not focusing on the other
It's
stuff.
it's probably not the most healthy habit to get in, also to be living in the future so much. Like I'm
Yeah.
doing this so that this thing might happen that I have no control over. And but then you just are, you're just kind of, I mean, it's also you can do stuff and be so absorbed in your work, you're not present. But so there's always
Hmm.
struggles for sure, but
Yeah.
um, there's like an overthinking or that kind of comes from trying to be strategic because you think you're in a game.
Yeah.
Reality, you might not be in that game anyway.
Yeah.
Or might not be the rules or what you think they are.
Yeah, exactly. There's so much uncertainty. I think when people try and be strategic, half the time they're shooting themselves in the foot. You know
Yeah,
what I mean? Like it's such a complex, yeah, world
yeah,
environment. It's changing. So if you're being strategic, being backwards looking, that's probably
yeah,
not what's going to be.
yeah,
So yeah, so exactly. I think it's just simpler if you just focus on research, that you enjoy, questions about the world you're trying to uncover,
yeah,
all that sort of thing, and then you'll enjoy it. And the other thing is, like, you know, research, it's such a long process, like
yeah,
5 years at least until 5 to 10 years, I find for my papers until they get published.
yeah,
And if you're not enjoying it at the
yeah,
beginning, by the time you're doing the third round of R&Rs, you're really not going to enjoy it. And so,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
yeah. So,
Totally,
anyways, yeah,
totally. I agree. Well, I
yeah,
think it's also probably, it's also kind of does sound like your production function really always probably did require you sort of really loving what you were doing. If someone had put all these handcuffs on you to do it a certain way, I could easily imagine it being just super boring. Like
yeah.
you wouldn't have probably, you don't strike me as somebody, you strike me as somebody that just does what they enjoy.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's right. I think I didn't have, super high career aspirations, and so I was like,
Right.
what's more important to me is what what I really enjoy, and no, yeah, I really wasn't thinking about a job, yeah, even
Right,
getting the
right,
best
right,
job possible, yeah, and
right.
so, yeah. So I think that was one thing that was lucky for me. I think is yeah.
Well, it's so nice to meet, and they're very lucky to have you at UBC and all your whoever's you're in touch with. So I really appreciate you being on the show and just tolerating all my questions.
No, it was fun. Yeah. It's
Oh,
fun. Yeah, everyone likes to talk about themselves. So
yeah, true,
to
exactly,
have an hour of that. Yeah, exactly.
exactly, exactly. Well, you
Yeah.
have a great day.
Great. Thanks so much, Scott. It's a pleasure.
Running up